So give me the faith to finish the race. Looking up, got my eyes on you. I'll follow your lead, whatever it takes. Give it up, give it all for you. I won't worry about tomorrow, 'cause I know that you know where I'm going.
Hello and welcome to our next installment of Wednesday's Word. This week we'll continue our thoughts and meditations on Galatians chapter 5, something I've called a worthy walk when we talk about walking in the Spirit and not according to the flesh. So let me point your attention to Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 16, where it says this: "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. For the flesh sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I have forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." Now we'll stop there in our reading for this week as we begin to discuss what Paul calls the deeds of the flesh. Now the deeds of the flesh are the natural productions of our sinful hearts and what it leads us to in our lives. It is, in a certain sense, what comes naturally to us. Now we hear all the time the debate as to whether certain behaviors are natural. And the question I'd like to bring up to you this evening is simply this: so what if they are? Just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. In fact, we'll find over the next few weeks that many of the ways that we respond naturally are actually the worst possible ways that you can respond. And so tonight what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is sexual sin. The Bible's very clear about sexual sin and very specific about sexual sin. And regardless of our culture and its continued permissiveness and continued closed eyes to what God has really said, the parameters are very clear. And so what we find in Galatians 5 are three examples of sexual sin that Paul says are only natural. That is, it is the outgrowth of our fallen human hearts. Now, before we get to that, notice in verse 16 it says this. It says, "Walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh." What it's telling us to do is to overcome what is natural to us supernaturally. Now, in verse 19, we find this: "Now the deeds of the flesh are evident." They're obvious. We can't always define what's right and wrong. We can't always tell somebody this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. But when something's wrong, we know it. It's evident. It's obvious to us. And that's how Paul starts his argument as he begins to list the deeds of the flesh. He says these things are evident. They're, in Greek, it's the word phanera. They're manifest. They're obvious to us. And the first thing he says is that, the first thing he lists, I should say, is immorality. It says this in verse 19. "Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, and sensuality." Now, I would suggest to you that these are really three different ways of saying the same thing. Three different ways of referring to sexual sin. The first word that Paul uses is the Greek word porneia, which is translated in the New American Standard Bible as immorality. Porneia is a general term that refers to any sexual activity or desire outside of the scope of marriage. In fact, we get the word pornography from this word. It can also be translated as fornication, and in fact it is in the Bible in a couple different places translated that way. The second word that we find here is the Greek word uncleanness or impurity. The Greek word here is akatharsia, which means dirtiness. I mean, we still use that expression sometimes when we hear the expression a dirty joke or a dirty movie. The idea that sexual sin is unclean and dirty and not something that we should focus our mind upon should be manifest or obvious to us. And so Paul talks about sexual sin as immorality or porneia, as uncleanness or akatharsia, and the third word that he uses is sensuality. Sensuality simply means things that appeal to our fallen senses. Sins of the eyes, sins of the imagination, sins of the heart that are stimulated by billboards, by magazine articles, by our computer screens, by all these things that we see in our culture. Paul says that these things are evident, they're obvious. And because of that, we need to be very diligent against them. Now, one thing that Paul does go on to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, I'd like to read this passage to you, as Paul deals a little bit more at length with sexual sin. And he says this, starting in verse 12 of 1 Corinthians 6, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. Food is for the stomach, and the stomach is for food." You notice that? If we stop there for a second, he begins to appeal to us that there is a natural function of your stomach, and food is designed to meet that natural function. In the same way, there is a natural function for sexual desire and sexual fulfillment, and God has designed a way for those desires to be fulfilled. But our bodies do not exist for sexual gratification. They exist for something else. Even though our stomach does exist for food, our bodies don't exist for sex. He goes on to say this, "Yet the body is not for immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord is for the body. Now God has not only raised the Lord, but will also raise us through his power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take away the members of Christ and make them a member of a prostitute? May it never be." Now in Greek, this "may it never be" is the strongest negative possible. Me genoita. No way, he says. "Or do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? For he says the two shall become one flesh. But the one who joins himself to the Lord is one spirit with him." And here's where we get to the exhortation. Verse 18, "Flee immorality. Every other sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, and whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body." How then does this lead us to prayer? Well, simply stated, it leads us to prayer in the following ways. I would love to tell you that sexual sin is not something that Christians can fall into. I'd love to tell you that sexual temptations are things that are foreign or outside the church. It's simply not the case. And so if you ever want to pray for Calvary Bible Church, if you ever want to pray for the church of this world, that is the redeemed, blood-bought saints of the living God, if you want to pray for their purity, you will never waste your prayers. It is the need of the day, as we see more and more in churches, that men, women, and children are struggling with sexual sin. We have the answer. The answer is the Lord Jesus Christ. The answer is the gospel. And the answer is walking by faith and walking by the Spirit, so that we would not do what comes naturally to us. Let's pray.